Do you ever feel like Ursula or her creepy little eels? Offering your players the deal of a lifetime. Totally fair, no strings attached, and yet they just won't bite. Or worse, they do bite, and suddenly your whole campaign spirals into this frustrated mess of players and a deal that nobody actually likes. Today, we're talking about crafting deals so enticing, so irresistible, that your players will talk themselves into taking them, even when they know better. Stick around because by the end of this video, you'll have the tools to make deals that your players love to hate and that they can't wait to accept. So let's dive in. You know the look. That squint, that hesitation, the unspoken, this is a trap alarm going off in their heads. And honestly, they're not wrong, because taking these deals are usually a bad idea. Just like we as adults don't take candy from strangers. I stopped doing that at 23, I swear. Most players don't need to metagame for the PCs to not be delusional enough to think that accepting one of these bargains with a deal maker is a good idea. But here's the real reason your players are avoiding them. Your deals aren't tempting enough to outweigh the risks. If your players see a clear, safer alternative, why would they take this deal? And on the other hand, if the only choice is bad deal or no progress, then it's not a choice. It's railroading. Have you ever seen a player take a deal and then almost immediately regret it? Not in a fun, haha, my PC's so dumb storytelling kind of way, but in a I hate this, why did I do this kind of way. A deal that's all punishment and no intrigue, that's just a debuff in disguise. Costs and complications should be interesting. So think about what it looks like in play. Losing the ability to hit anything during combat? Boring. Failing all checks constantly? Annoying. Being forced to make morally complex choices that shake up the direction of the campaign? Now we're talking. So what are the worst offenders when it comes to punitive deals? Any deal that removes player agency or completely nerfs their main abilities, has an unfair cost to benefit ratio, or pits party members against each other in a PvP way that is unfun for the group. And if your goal is to have players pursue an arc to fix something that happened with the deal, make sure the journey itself is fun, or else your players are just gonna quit. Here's a test. If your deal maker can be replaced by another random NPC and nothing changes, they're not a good deal maker. Ask yourself, why does this entity care about the party? What's their bigger agenda? What do they stand to gain from this deal? A powerful being just popping in to offer the party a random deal? That feels fishy. And not in a cool, intriguing way. If your deal maker isn't tied into the story, then your players won't be tied into the deal. The first step to crafting compelling deals then, start with a compelling deal maker. Whether it's a fae, hag, fiend, or celestial, or something else entirely. The best deal makers have clear motivations that will eventually collide with the group's path. If the devil that the party bargains with ends up toppling a rival, but it ends up having no real impact on the party's story, then what was the point of the deal in the first place? And your players don't need to know why it matters immediately, which thankfully means neither do you, but it should have effect on play somewhere down the line. And remember, hierarchy also matters. A goblin merchant's deal isn't going to be on the same level as an archfae's bargain. So how might different types of deal makers set the tone? For fae, they're tricksy and whimsical and bound by strange rules, like the law of reciprocity. Their deals feel like riddles. They seem deceptively simple, but can end up being dangerously complex. It should feel a bit like the fae is a curious cat and your players are mice. They might eat them, they might just bat them around a little bit, or they might simply watch them from afar. Their goals shouldn't be easily discernible by what they ask for, but what they want usually has something to do with court standing, or various whims, or just entertaining themselves and their friends. Good ol' harmless fun. For fiends, these are probably going to be devils, and one of my favorite things is that they're usually lawfully aligned, so these will probably be more straightforward, legalistic deals. And depending on the standing of the fiend, they're probably going to be more oriented to collecting souls, that way they can advance their standing, but they might also be locked out of certain areas because evil, and they might need your players to access those areas for them. I think these deals are also the type that are more likely to start out small and innocuous, just to get the PCs used to the idea of making them before they try to entangle them with something bigger. For Hags, these deals should feel twisted and unsettling and maybe even be a little more body horror oriented. Their deals often feel corrupting, even if they start out a little more harmless. Hags are usually after stronger magic powers, sometimes minions to do their bidding. And they're also the beings that are more likely to have kind of twisted, convoluted deals, and we'll talk more about that later. I just urge you now to use something like that sparingly. But then we have Celestials, and I love them because I feel like they're so often overlooked. I think they're a great vehicle for deals because players are going to implicitly trust them a hell of a lot more than the other categories. The types of deals that these guys are going to make are going to be a lot more righteous, cosmic justice oriented, but they're also going to be very burdensome and morally complex. They want to further their deity's hold. Polytheism makes this particularly interesting to me. They might also want to help PCs atone or help guide their destinies, but that doesn't ultimately mean that they're going to be good in the way that we mere mortals would understand it. I think this can be seen in the type of deals where they want something done, but they might not be willing to get their own hands dirty to do it. And remember, any highly intelligent creature can make deals. Liches, dragons, mind flayers. The key is knowing what they want and how that collides with your player's desires. And obviously not all beings can grant powers, but they can grant services, give access to magic items, that sort of thing. So once you know what this PC wants and how it intersects with the player's goals, you're ready to plan out your targets. Not every player will take a deal, but if you know what motivates your players, you can tailor irresistible bargains to them. Like I said, most players know better than to take these deals, but there are some exceptions. Our number one target? Instigators! In my video about finding the secret sauce for your campaign, I shared that forum that helps your players start thinking about what they like and enjoy in games. Instigators are people that enjoy making things happen. They're not afraid of consequences even when things are obviously bad ideas. They'll provoke the wrong person, they'll open that trapped door, and if you play your cards right, they'll absolutely say yes to some fun bonkers bargains. They're great to target because what you need in a lot of these moments is someone that knows better but just doesn't fucking care. Someone that isn't too precious about the things that can go wrong or about their character's mortality and has that innate curiosity to see, what does this button do? They're not the only types of players that can be tempted though. Other types of players might need more finessing, might haggle a little bit more, and might need you to approach this through different means. If a player scores high as a storyteller or as an actor, make sure this deal has backstory tie-in or stakes that feel deeply personal for this character. Lost memories, long lost loved ones, and unfinished destinies are all particularly vulnerable to deal makers for these characters. And a little less likely, but not entirely off the table, are optimizers and power gamers. They might bite if the reward is big enough and specific enough to their build, but usually they're a lot more worried about downsides if this all goes wrong. So you really need to tailor the amount of risk here for this type of player. But strategists and tacticians are incredibly unlikely. A deal isn't something they can easily measure or plan around, and they're very calculated players, so they're usually out. But the situation matters too. Even a reluctant player might consider a deal if a PC dies and this is the chance to bring them back. Or they're outmatched in a crucial battle. You know, think Helm's Deep pre-Rohan arrival. Or if they've been chasing a MacGuffin for a while, and this is the fastest way to get it. Time crunches, baby! The important thing to remember is that these offers should connect to the PC's goals. And that's one of the reasons it's important for players to have clear, specific goals, so that we can mess with them in a more meaningful way. But when it comes to a PC making a deal, it's not just about what they're getting. It's about why they're saying yes in the first place. What kind of story are they excited to explore? What sort of arc are they setting themselves up for? Don't be afraid to have an above-table chat, especially when the stakes are high. Your players aren't mind readers. That shocking twist that you think is crystal clear, it might be totally invisible to them. You have an entire world in your head. Your players, they only see the puzzle pieces that you give to them. And even then, they see them in the same way that I thought I saw leaves before I got glasses. Did you guys know that the veins in leaves aren't just artistic license? They're actually there. So if a deal is intended to be messy or risky or have long-term consequences, make sure they at least have a sense of what they're getting into. Players often gravitate towards certain story tropes when they accept a deal, consciously or not. So here are a few to keep in mind. There's the self-explanatory read the fine print. There's exploit the loophole. The devil's in the detail and so is their escape plan. There's just one impossible task, which is just get X and you can have Y back. There's a heinous exchange, where the party finally has to ask, are we not the good guys? And that's not what I signed up for, where the deal seems fine at first before it gets twisted into something darker. And quick note, this one works best with low stakes deals. Something like paying gold for a magic item that turns out to have a minor curse. There are things that players can sense are too good to be true. But if a high stakes deal suddenly shifts into a gotcha moment, that can feel a little more unfair than fun. But each of these tropes leads to a different type of journey. So if a player is seriously considering a deal, especially a high stakes one, double check if they actually want to engage with the type of story that this is gonna create. If they just assume they can wiggle out of consequences, they might be in for a rude awakening, potentially even a dead character. It's okay to be explicit about the risks. If you don't want to spell things out, at least telegraph the danger. Maybe NPCs whisper about this being's deal is ending horribly. Maybe they meet someone who had a similar bargain, and that person regrets everything. Maybe there are eerie omens, cryptic warnings, or a weirdly specific contract that just screams bad idea. However you do it, just make sure your players have enough information to feel intrigued, but not blindsided. Alright, we've laid the groundwork, now comes the fun part. Crafting a deal your players won't just take, but that they'll agonize over. I love a good will they, won't they session. But before we start throwing around infernal contracts and fey bargains, we need to decide something crucial. We need to decide if this deal is low stakes or high stakes. So the bigger the stakes, the bigger the costs. That's the rule. So what kind of deal are we making? Low stakes deals are exciting but not world shattering. These can be things like an uncommon magic item, a minor ability like speak with small beasts, or a bag of gold so that they can buy something they have no business affording. While high stakes deals involve something game changing. Something like a shortcut through a massive challenge, the ability to rewrite a piece of history, or killing off a major villain without having to do the work. Deciding the type of stakes for this deal is going to help you craft the rewards, the costs, and also the penalties a player might face if they decide to break this deal. So, what do players actually want? Deals only work if a player wants something badly enough to consider the costs. And while some might be satisfied with a magic sword, others are gonna dream bigger. Resurrecting a long-dead ally, access to a forbidden spell, an extra feat that pushes them past their limits, or maybe erasing an enemy from existence. The bigger the ask, the more room you have to charge a devastating cost. No one's selling their soul for a +2 greatsword. No, I might have one player that would do that. But immortality, a love lost, those are things worth bargaining for. By the way, I have a whole list of ideas in a Notion freebie that I made for this video. It has potential boons, potential costs, situations for you to plant these types of story hooks in. So make sure to check it out. Remember, you can duplicate pages right to your own free Notion account. That way you can keep it forever. That's pretty neat. And if you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing. That way the tubes that be show you my face again in the future. But now that you have some ideas about what the PCs might want, what will they pay? Again, surprisingly, the higher the stakes, the higher the cost. For a deal that's low stakes, low costs, a fae might say something like, "Lend me your ears and your eyes for a fortnight, just in case there's anything I need to know." Players are going to assume they want this fae to just report back to them, to spy. But surprise! There is now a fae co-inhabiting your player's body for the next 2 sessions. A devil might ask something like, "Simply plant this sigil in a place of importance." A small, harmless request, until your players realize that this sigil actually does matter, just much later. High stakes, high cost situations get a little more juicy. A fiend might make a bargain and say, "I require a single act of betrayal. Just one. You choose when, and you choose who. The moment you do, the reward is yours." Or the ever mischievous fae, "Once a year at midnight, you must dance when you hear my music, no matter where you are." Players naturally forget about this until they need to start river dancing while they're sneaking through an enemy hideout. This is something I love in particular because players always see fae as so whimsical and weird, so they can assume that a deal they made was silly and they are getting away with so much. But there's always a part of them that knows deep down that this is going to happen at an inopportune time. I also like to make sure things like this actually matter to a fae's powers or needs. So maybe for some reason this'll break a deal with an archfae that this fae had to make or something, sending out a ripple effect into the world. Another great potential cost is a future favor ode. This works well for players that are a little less gambling averse because they have time to close a bunch of loopholes, they get to feel clever, but then you have free reign and it can be super fun to think up these things over time. But also don't be afraid to just let them make offers. If they're dealing with a hag and the hag has something that they want, have her say something like, "This is pretty valuable. What do you got?" And then go from there. And remember, if your players love to haggle, let them. Have multiple versions of the deal ready. Let them feel like they're outsmarting your NPC. Loopholes? They'll try to close them. That's fine. I don't want you to hurt my loved ones. Okay, sure. I need to make sure I won't die from this. Reasonable. Of course, there's always more consequences waiting in the wings. And I'm not saying there necessarily should be these types of complications. But if players try to cheat a deal, these things can be absolutely reasonable to introduce into play. And again, if you find yourself in this situation, you might want to telegraph it or have a straight up above table talk. That way no real people feel fucked over, but don't just focus on specifically screwing players over with deals. I find that focusing on moving the deal maker's plans forward makes worrying about things like loopholes a lot less likely to come up in play, at least in a way that you're not expecting. But what if your players break a deal? One of the very likely outcomes of your players taking a deal is that they might also plan on breaking this deal. Depending on the way you set this deal up with your players, there might actually be ways to finagle out of this contract, and that can be a whole lot of fun to explore. But other times, players will try to cheat these NPCs, or more often, they'll just straight up forget about this. If it's a small deal, then these can lead to fun, lighthearted consequences. But if it's a big, high-stakes deal, their PC wouldn't forget about promising away their firstborn child. Please remind them. But if they think they can just intentionally break a deal without consequences, that's adorable. An important part of deals and bargains is refraining from making things feel like a gotcha. We want any consequences of breaking these pacts to feel like a natural result of the PC's actions. They should see it coming. Even if they did try to get away with it, it shouldn't be a surprise. And again, we don't necessarily want these consequences to be punitive in a way that makes the game unfun. You can do more extreme things with short time limits sometimes, but otherwise something like disadvantage on all checks forever becomes really bad. If you're going to give out consequences for like a major contract infraction though, yeah, this should be a little more serious. Again, talk about this with your players when you start introducing the ideas of deals and bargains and pacts and all that stuff though. Please. So what can we do with these broken player promises? You should make the time fit the crime. Say the players deliberately delay on a time-sensitive deal. They needed to fetch an object for this fae on another plane, and they said they'd be back in 3 days, only due to some lollygagging, it took them 4. No biggie, right? Well, when they return, only 3 days pass for them. Like they said, it'd only take 3 days. But years have gone by for everybody else. They weren't directly punished. The dealmaker simply stopped holding time up for them in the mortal realm. Taking the life of a player who defaults on a deal like this would be excessive, to say the least. You can make it poetic, thematic, or ironic. Let the players feel like they actually chose their own punishment, even if they didn't realize it at the time. So if the player agrees to a later favor, thinking they can just refuse in some way, and when their fiend friend calls it in, they might be expecting a fight or a punishment and then think they simply get to move on. Instead, the power granted to them simply vanishes mid-battle, at the worst moment. The magic sword, just a rusty blade now. That strength boost, gone. Taking it back is perfectly reasonable. Just the timing is very bad as a key part of this punishment. You can even consider delaying the consequences. What if they do in fact get away with it? For now, I actually really love consequences where the group almost gets away with it. The hag warned them about betrayal, but when they turn on her, nothing happens. Months later, they wake up without a reflection. No way to check their face, no way to admire themselves in their shiny armor, no way to look into a loved one's eyes and see their own eyes staring back at them. And then they realize, if the hag took this, what else might she have taken? This can also lead to story hooks, like maybe their reflection has escaped Mirrorland and is now traveling through mirrors, trying to murder them and take their place in the mortal realm. Which brings me to my next point. Make the punishment a story, not just a setback. Instead of a one-off or fun, crippling penalties, a great consequence is interesting and creates an ongoing problem that the player actively has to deal with. Instead of just handing out a debuff, make the consequence a new problem that needs to be solved. Instead of a simple stat penalty, a god simply stops recognizing them. They can't be resurrected or revived. No divine magic touches them anymore. Instead of an instant punishment, their debt gets sold to someone even worse than the dealmaker. Congratulations. You now belong to someone even more terrifying than the devil you originally owed. And the best part? The rest of the party now has a reason to get involved in these deals gone wrong. Something like this keeps the ball rolling and creates this sense of escalating consequences. The PC isn't dead, cursed, or powerless, but they have a significantly bigger problem to contend with. And this doesn't mean that you can't have a fight to the death as an outcome or things like stat penalties. Again, especially if you talk to your players about potential consequences. But it's a lot more fun if there's suddenly a pressing reason for the party to try and revive these PCs after and continue these arcs. The same thing goes for something like reducing important ability scores or taking away certain abilities. If you discuss with your players and they understand the consequences, you also need to think of ways they can get out of these situations. Whether it's by making another way worse deal, or preferably some other type of quick out. Some potential ideas for punishments, both big and small, include stuff like they lose the ability to tell lies. They can still withhold information, but now anytime they try to lie, it's done at disadvantage. Their luck might turn sour, so minor misfortunes start to follow them. The wagon kicks up mud all over their freshly polished armor, their arrows miss targets by just an inch, but they might get disadvantage on all skill checks until they take a long rest. A fiend might brand them with an infernal mark. Clerics and paladins throughout the land can now sense their treachery. Or if they really mess up, maybe they're petrified. They're not dead, but it'll take a very strong spell to undo that. Again, talk to your players about this first. But maybe for 3 to 5 sessions, that player now has to play a different character while the group figures out what to do about it. So the key to really great punishments is that they should kinda suck, but they should also be fun to play through. So now that you've got the tools to make your deals irresistible, remember, deals should move the game forward, not punish players into quitting. The best costs aren't just mechanical, They're story-driven. And most importantly, the best deals are the ones that make them say, okay, just this once. Yeah, just this once. So drop your best deal-making moments in the comments. I love seeing the wild bargains that people come up with. And if you haven't already, make sure to check out my Campaign Building 101 series, because next week we're going to be talking session prep, so don't miss it.